And first in our fabulous lineup is the talented Phoebe Collings-James. Phoebe is a sculptor working across mediums from studio pottery to film, performance and more, exploring work that speaks to universal themes of violence, desire and fear. Having studied fine art in London, her first experience in ceramics was in 2014 during the Nuove, I haven't pronounced that right, artist residency in Italy. Maybe Phoebe can pronounce it properly shortly. In 2019, Phoebe established Mudbelly Ceramics in London, comprising a shop and teaching facility offering free ceramic courses for Black people in London, taught by Black ceramicists. As the 2021 Freelands Ceramic Fellow, she has recently opened an exhibition called A Scratch at Camden Arts Centre, which I would urge you to visit if you can. It's open until December 23rd. So it is my great pleasure to hand over the conversation to Phoebe Collings-James. I'm sharing my screen, so if you bear with me. And over to you, Phoebe. Thank you.
Nice. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm Phoebe Collings-James. I'm an artist and ceramicist, and I grew up in London, in East London, which is now where I also have my studio. And yeah, as Rhiannon said, I started my ceramics journey properly about 7 or 8 years ago when I went on a residency in Italy to it was a residency that was being held in a ceramics town, a tiny ceramics town called Nuove. And so the title of the residency was ingeniously called Nuove, you know, kind of like new, Nuove, something like that. And yeah, it was amazing. Basically, I guess like Stoke and a lot of ceramics towns across Europe and probably across the world, there was the industry still going on, but it has like much reduced from, I guess, some of its former glory. And so some of these studios had big spaces that could still be used that they weren't using. And a Milanese curator decided to kind of like try and open these spaces up to artists who might not have experienced ceramics before, but who wanted to try it. And so to start a bit more into going back a bit further, I guess I was sort of like, I'm going to talk and probably sometimes over explain or like go into a bit of a biography. And I know that some of you will be at different places in your own like art ceramic path, but yeah, so sorry if I do over explain things. But I went to university in London. I went to Goldsmiths and studied fine art and graduated in 2009. So just over 10 years ago. And I chose to go to Goldsmiths because at the time it was one of the only places that had quite a broad program. You didn't have to specialize, and from what I knew of it, you just got given a studio and got to make work. And as a 19-year-old, that was really exciting to me. And so initially I was kind of trying out everything I could. I had an interest in photography and filmmaking, and was also in the sort of like sculpture studios working with plaster and some woodwork and kind of anything that I could get my hands on. And I guess that probably was the kind of beginning of some sort of like seeds of my practice that have like endured. And that's, I guess, the mixture between the 4D in film and sound and the 4D in sculpture, as I imagine it. And yeah, so I kind of like, I left college, I left university with a kind of mixed feeling. Like, I think I I hadn't really been exposed to anything like that growing up. So a lot of me was just able to kind of like fully embrace and enjoy it. And it wasn't until I sort of left and took a deep breath that I also was able to acknowledge, like, you know, as Goldsmiths is now, it's still like got lots of problematic structures, racist structures, kind of like unresolved kind of bureaucracy and things like that, that were definitely had a negative effect on my sanity and other things, and also my awareness of the breadth of what art could be, because it was at the time very much still going through a kind of like European, very sort of like American, French, British focused lens, white American lens. And so yeah, so I guess I spent some years, I had a studio immediately. I think my first studios were in my house. Like one time I was living in a more of a warehouse space, and then I kind of had more of a normal bedroom. But each time I really tried to have a space in my room, wherever I was renting, that I could like make stuff. And that would have been my first kind of experience of studio post university. And then, which was also like toxic and messy and not necessarily advisable, but it worked. I remember at one point I was back living with my parents and making like things out of resin on their kitchen table, which again is like not advisable, but it happened. And yeah, so that kind of brought me into, I guess, like then finally getting my own proper studio. I guess people decide to do different routes in terms of like earning their money. And I made a decision early on that I didn't want to work proximate to galleries. I ended up working in shops and bars and just kind of any different thing that I could get my hands on that was still like, you know, something close to either music or fashion or making things or anything. Like I think I worked at a photographer's agency as a junior assistant and things like that. Anything that was sort of adjacent but not actually the thing, because I just knew how easy it would be to be a bit disenchanted. Well, I also had friends who kind of went and did sort of like internships or worked as invigilators in museums and had like a good or different experience. And so then I guess that kind of took me along to then going on this residency. And that happened because of a friend who was, I guess, trying to make his way, trying to be a curator. And he was kind of, I guess he'd sort of like met the person who was doing this residency, and I told him that I had an interest in making ceramics, and he put me up for it. And I guess that kind of speaks to one of the first things about sort of like how to build community. And there is really a lot of putting yourself out there, and we all have very different personalities, and some of us are going to be much more shy or resistant or like or maybe practically not able to like travel or like be in public so much. So like there are going to be lots of different ways that different people feel about trying to connect with others. But I definitely think that it's kind of that kind of community building is one of the most important things in art and ceramics for like many different reasons. And I guess I'll go into it a bit more in a bit, but yeah, that's kind of something to begin with. But yeah, maybe we can move on. I'll kind of like dip in and out of this kind of like bit of a biography style, and then also showing you some works, and please feel free to ask me any questions. So this is one of the first works I made. It was called Medusa, and I mean, so much of the learning that I did on that residency was basically me not knowing how to do stuff, it breaking, blowing up, and then like figuring it out that way. I didn't speak Italian. Also, some of the people, one of the sort of like maestros was sort of like in his maybe early 90s, had like a cataract and spoke dialects. And like, so there was like a lot of the ways I was learning there was just through, in a very lovely way, different elders laughing at me and then sort of showing me a better way of doing things. So I think that's kind of sort of visible, the amount of sort of like fumbling and playing around and figuring out that's maybe in this sculpture. Maybe we can go on. Yeah, so then, oh, sorry. I've lost that screen, sorry. Yeah, so then this is a little bit forward, maybe 3 or 4 years might have lapsed, and I tried to sort of get my hands on clay, but didn't really manage it. By this point, I'd gone to live in New York. And I was able to do that because I'd also done a residency there. I sort of started going back and forth and had some not strictly legal jobs, just some like cash in hand stuff on like in a noodle bar. And so I was able to sort of like stay with friends and spend some time there, and then eventually was able to live there. And when I was there, I started going to a ceramic studio in Brooklyn, and I decided to, I didn't really know exactly what I was doing, but I kind of, the seed had been planted in Italy, and then I really just like wanted to get back into working with ceramics, because I guess all of you know that like once you see the sort of like transformative qualities, it's very addictive and you want to get closer to it again in any way. I think a lot of people feel that you want to get close to it in any way you can. And so, yeah, I decided to enroll on a throwing course. And also I was having a sort of, my experience of studio, at that point I had done a lot of exhibitions, kind of like small ones, some that I'd organised, some with sort of more formal galleries. I think mainly group shows, but maybe I'd done some small sort of solo things as well. And yeah, and so I kind of like had a bit of confidence, I guess, in sort of like the kind of work I wanted to make, but still knew that ceramics, I thought that ceramics was still part of it. And sorry, I kind of like lost my thought, but what I was going to say is part of that studio life was often sort of going to the studio and just thinking a lot, and kind of like almost like quite a humiliating experience or humbling experience of just sort of being taken apart in the silence of studio life, of sort of like sitting there, because I didn't have something that was like super process led. It was much more conceptual. And then sort of like, once I sort of like had formed an idea, maybe there would be a short elements of like high production, but ultimately there was a lot of time just sitting and thinking and drawing and trying things out, but also like a lot of angst. And I kind of wanted to experience something that what I imagined with throwing, that could be somewhere where I could kind of connect to clay, but also have some structure. And that is pretty much what I found, even though it's, how did I go? Sorry, I'm just reading a question. How did you go about organising your exhibitions and getting your pieces showed? Okay, yeah. So I remember like when I finished university, obviously you have your group show and stuff. And and then I remember afterwards just thinking like, how do you do this? How do we do this? And so one of the first, and I just don't know. I guess maybe some people might kind of get some interest from their degree shows, but I think that isn't that common, or isn't a given for sure. And I didn't actually know lots of people who were having that kind of exposure, especially people who didn't already have some sort of connection to that world. So like a couple of people who I do know had stuff going on for them, like had an artist parent or something like that. That's not always the case, but like, or maybe they were doing something that already seemed quite, I don't know, quite like fully formed, maybe like, I don't know, painters, who knows. But one of the first things I did was make a show myself. And basically what we did is I was living with someone who's also an artist and a friend of mine, and we moved every single thing in our house, in our bedrooms, everything into this tiny spare room that, well, it wasn't even a spare room, it was a cupboard room that someone else was living in. Like Tetris, we moved everything into that room. we cleared it out and we just invited everyone we knew and made 2 exhibitions. I don't know where we slept those nights actually, but anyway, that was one thing that I did. Then some other, I think it was mostly like making shows on my own, but like with other people. So like there were a couple of collectives that one that I was sort of part of, and then one that I just asked if I could help them with anything. And then once I asked them if I could help them with anything, I was like, oh, I'm actually making these drawings that might be cool for your show. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff. And I think that's where it's really good. And now with kind of, I guess with, if you use social media, I think it can be really good for connecting with people. And if you don't, I think you really have to do it old school and email people and text, you know, get people's numbers. And a lot of that would have been through maybe going to exhibitions, going to openings, and just speaking to people. And I mean, like, I am not, I didn't find it easy to sort of like make those connections, but it kind of, and it sometimes at times felt like it was happening really slowly. But yeah, there was a lot of just DIY stuff and maybe like renting out or persuading someone to give you some space for a little while. I would definitely recommend also kind of, galleries don't really like cold calling at all, and often don't respond to that, but definitely like, I don't know if there's anywhere that you can think that's like an unused space, or that someone that can give you something for like an affordable amount of money, at a couple of £100 or something, I don't know, something like that. I would definitely say to kind of like ask to do things like that. And yeah, so the short answer is doing things yourself initially definitely helps. And also sometimes like doing setup, so like finding somewhere, maybe if you do have a studio space, and like setting it up like it's an exhibition and taking photographs of it and putting them online, or making a website and things like that. Also things that can be somewhat for free are also good things to do. I hope that helps, that answer. And then, yeah, and then after that, that slowly kind of grew into like getting some attention from more established galleries. Okay, yeah, so back to this. Yeah, so I was in a ceramic studio in Brooklyn, and I started the wheel throwing course and became obsessed with it, and basically went there every single day. And also was very frustrated because I wasn't that good at it immediately, and it was annoying, and I thought that I should be better because I was an artist, and saw people who like were, I don't know, had other day jobs and were just like flourishing, and I was annoyed about it and competitive. And so yeah, so this show kind of came from some of the very, very early ceramics that I was making as part of that show. And I guess something to note here is that like this was a film called Mother Tongue, Mother Master, and the soundtrack for it is the sound of the bells. So it's a kind of 2 or 3 minute long 16mm film of me in this bell mask, just contorting and shaking until it kind of slips off. And I guess I just wanted to sort of include these to sort of just to say how important it's been to kind of at all times keep the ceramics kind of really engaged with the rest of my practice and work, and how much the two feed into each other. This is an exhibition that was on in 2019. It was a group show at Fact in Liverpool, and it was called I Feel You. And Helen, who created the show, was actually someone who supported one of the studio spaces that I was in. And we kept a good relationship, and she invited me to do this commission, which was the first kind of large scale and like more sort of like, I don't know, conceptual ceramic work that I had made. And this was called live and active gut cultures. Wait, I don't even think, something emotional detritus and something else. It's a very, very long title, and now I'm gonna blush because I can't remember it. But yeah, so this was 2019 to 20. And this wall is probably about 3 or 4 meters high. Maybe you can go on. And so in terms of the materials, these are black clay tiles. And I was really interested at the time in processes of sgraffito, so like inscribing and working on the sort of surface of the clay in styles that I guess I'd previously seen a lot in slipware, terracotta slipware traditionally. And I was kind of interested in working on the surface as if they were kind of like, I don't know, sort of like live drawings or something like that. This was the next piece I made last year during lockdown, and it was an invitation from Cafe Otto, which is a live music space in London, and they asked me to make a sound work. And it took me a long time because of the lethargy and everything that was happening last year. And I came across a diary entry that said, "Can you move towards yourself without flinching?" And I think it was from a couple of years before. Sorry, that's my rice cooker. If you can hear that sound. Yeah, can you move towards yourself without flinching? And it really struck me in that moment, which was like a very kind of like tender and emotional time of this question and like, how I might answer it. And so I asked several friends to see if they could also answer the question and give me a sonic response. And so some of those came back with kind of like instrumental sounds, a friend who's a musician, some of them came back with poetry or spoken word, and another friend came back with a sound note that was her singing to her 2 daughters in the field, and she was talking about how doing that was one of the few sort of like easy moments during the pandemic or during the lockdowns that they were experiencing. Yeah, and I made the ceramic to go with it. And this is a image of maybe 2019 of a show I had in Cologne. And I guess I was thinking about this work because it really ties, I guess it was like one of the beginnings of the mural, or sort of large clay mural that I made. And with this, it was tissue paper, and I would work on each side of the surface and really be thinking about sort of creating this bank of images and codes and symbols and making up a kind of non-linear story of kind of very sort of evocative like ideas and dates and stories essentially. And so yeah, that's fine. And then we move on to Mudbelly, which I started in 2019. Originally it was just the name of an Instagram account that I set up so that I could share my pots and my sort of journey with ceramics. And as it grew, and I sort of like, I never wanted to sort of separate my art practice and the pottery completely. I wanted it to have overlaps and slippage, but there was also a need to sort of maybe just create space for it to sort of be its own thing as well. And so initially it was the Instagram, and it was me sharing the pots. And as I got ready to potentially sell them, which I did for the first time at Christmas last year, I decided to sort of make a more formal website. And then around the same time, I was thinking about kind of the spaces I was working in, and I guess this often happens, it's kind of like being at Goldsmiths. Initially, it's just sort of like blocking out all of the noise, enjoying and being immersed in the sort of like the newness of the experience of learning. And then with a little bit of distance, it's sort of like considering what that learning environment is, what I'm learning, and what is kind of like quite significantly missing. And so in thinking about the spaces that I was learning in, and also returning to London, where I moved back to sort of the area that I grew up in East London, I realised that the spaces that I were in were almost exclusively white and definitely non-black. And I know, and I knew by then that wasn't sort of conducive to sort of like learning something, especially something like ceramics, where you kind of then are only definitely getting kind of one version of history and one sort of like one channel of knowledge. And so I set up Mudbelly Teachers as an intentional Black, queer, feminist pottery space that seeks an intimate, reciprocal approach to learning. And I basically wanted to get other Black ceramicists to lead the course, both to help my learning, and at that point I was sort of considering starting to teach, and I really wanted to have the experience myself and also for other people. And I was thinking a lot about different access needs and different access barriers. So recognizing that a lot of it was financial, was that the spaces, I mean, in New York, it's actually a bit cheaper, which is weird, but in London especially, like they were just completely non-accessible for so many people, and especially in the areas they were popping up. So for example, in London, some of the big ceramics kind of membership sort of spaces were in Peckham and Leighton, and those are two areas which actually have predominantly Black and brown communities and are sort of being fairly recently gentrified, and yet inside those buildings it was completely non-representative. And so yeah, I managed to get funding to do some of the first courses, and because of delays we ended up pushing them. They were supposed to start last year, but we ended up doing them in May and June this year. And they were amazing. And yeah, they were really amazing. We had artist Shawanda Corbett, who is an incredible artist who basically uses wheel thrown techniques and kind of like objects to create these kind of incredible sculptures that are sort of made in a sort of like towering, almost Jenga-like style. Who are some of Chris Bramble taught, and his daughter Freya also taught, and who was our first one? Basila Noha also taught some of the courses. So yeah, that was great. Yeah, and then in terms of my own learning, I put this in because I guess some of the things that I've come back to as I've sort of started to like weave the ceramics into my arts practice, and yeah, like going back and forth between Mudbelly and some exhibition making and things like that has been sort of like re-engaging with learning. So even though these pots are not a completely precise example, going back to sort of like actually try to learn how to do things like repetitive throwing and throwing to scale and weight and things like that were things that really helped me expand some of the more sculptural ideas that I wanted to do, because it kind of gave me just some parameters and also access to different sort of like technical histories and knowledge. Yeah, and these are some more Mudbelly pots. How am I doing for time? I'm going, oh, okay, maybe I can go a bit quicker. Okay, so this is Doyle Lane. He is my absolute hero. He was a ceramicist who was, I guess, like at his peak in some ways in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, 80s, and he was a California modernist, and he was living in California at a time of segregation. He would have lived through segregation and like, yeah, in a very hostile environment for Black people. And yeah, his work is such a big inspiration, and also his work ethics. And so a lot of Mudbelly is kind of based on some of his ideas about kind of creating a business that's stable for yourself. And I think that was a big thing for me, wanting Mudbelly to give me some resources, like financial resources, so that it would take a strain off of the art, like being part of the sort of like art industry and art complex, which can kind of, you know, is really a racket and based on kind of like a stock market, you know, where like if you're in the right flow, then maybe you're going to be selling things for thousands of pounds, but it's kind of like a really very difficult system. So yeah, look him up. We can go to the next one so that I'm not running over too much. And so these next ones were just again, like different part of my practice. Again, working collectively, working with an artist, a very good artist friend of mine who is a dancer and works in performance, and we made this performance work called Sounds for Survival together. And as you can see in our hand, we have these ceramic balls, which was an amazing thing to be able to include. And some of them, I think in the next slide, you can see it also ended up smashed, but that was also a great moment. This is sort of reading poems and yeah, part of the performance. And now we're to the show at Camden, and yeah, I got the opportunity to do a residency at Camden Arts Centre. It started in October last year, and was the resources and kind of like time that I was able to have there really transformed a lot of elements of my practice and how I've been working. And yeah, these are some of the things that I made. Some of you might recognize these as almost pulled handles. Yeah, you can go to the next one. Maybe whiz through, we're going. And so yeah, this is an installation. So the sort of piece to the left here is a sound sculpture, sound work. And these are kind of bells that have speakers inside them. And those bells were thrown on the wheel in sections. And then I think that's it. Yeah. Yeah, if you have any more questions, then please ask.
Oh, thank you so much, Phoebe. That was wonderful. It was so lovely to hear more. We like did a very quick go through of it earlier, but it was absolutely fabulous just to hear more from you. If anybody has anything they'd like to share now, or ask now, please feel free to pop it in the chat, or we can move on to the next speaker. I'll give you a few minutes. I'll stop my screen share. Oh, lovely. Phoebe, thank you so much. That was fantastic. So great.
Thank you.
And we've got lovely comments in the chat about how great it was. All right, so next we have, I'm getting distracted by your comments, it's lovely. Next we have Joanne Mills and Vicky Lomas. So Joanne joined the BCB staff team in 2015 after returning to live and work in North Staffordshire after a period of of time training in ceramics and glass at the Royal College of Art and Cardiff Metropolitan. She also has a PGCE, after which she spent some years teaching in London. Her love of clay was encouraged by her experiences growing up in Stoke-on-Trent, and her first experiences of work at the Wedgwood Visitor Centre and Gladstone Pottery Museum. Joanne is BCB's engagement manager, resident artist with us at BCB, and is a wonderful colleague. She has focused on developing a community of makers, both in the studio at the Spode Work site, and with community groups across Stoke-on-Trent. She is particularly committed to working with others in an open and collaborative way, responding to individuals' interests and motivations. Joanne is in conversation with Service Manager for Stoke Recovery Service, Vicky Lomas. Stoke Recovery Service is an abstinence-based recovery centre supporting residents of Stoke-on-Trent who have substance misuse issues, but have made the decision to become abstinent and are motivated to building a fulfilling recovery lifestyle. The service offers one-to-one support, groups and meaningful activities, along with opportunities of peer support in a safe environment. Vicky has been instrumental in many people's journeys and also in BCB's working with their groups. It's my pleasure to hand over to Vicky and to Jo. And I'll also share my screen so we can share your presentation.
I'll just say hello, and I'm really sorry, I'm sort of cutting my head off. I've had a technical issue and had to use a different device, so I'm a little bit all over the place. But I'm just going to give you a few minutes just to read this beautiful poem that's come out of some recent work that we've done with Stoke Recovery Service. And I think it's really powerful, so I'll give you a few minutes to read that. Okay, so Vicky and I are going to sort of share this between the two of us and go between the two of us, so hopefully it will work okay. So we've been lucky, well, I feel very lucky to have worked with Vicky for almost 4 years. We started working together in 2017 on a project called Recast, and the project brings together creativity, clay and recovery. It has quite a long history, even before that I started to work on it, and some of the founder members are in the audience. Dena, Bagi and Helen Felsey was also part of a pilot project called Typecast. So I felt like I was handed this very strong foundation of to build on. So the project in its current form has been running since 2017, and it started off with weekly sessions at the recovery service in Hanley in Stoke-on-Trent, and I would go on a Wednesday morning, and it was more of a drop-in session at first, so people would come along and we'd make together and we'd explore clay, and we'd begin to think about how working with clay might impact on our well-being, and also might actually, some of the processes might actually reflect the processes that you go through when you're going through the recovery process. And that worked really well, and it was very popular with a lot of the clients. We did I went on maternity leave for a little while, and when we came back, it was quite a good point to reflect and kind of think about how we ran the groups. So I will go on to talk a little bit about about that change and how that change came through change in funding, and also a kind of reflective point. So sorry, I'll just checking my notes. Okay, so I'll hand over to Vicky now, who's going to tell you a little bit about how the clients get involved from that side of things.
Okay, thanks, Jo. So when clients arrive at Stoke Recovery Service, some people are really comfortable with opening up and talking about their life experiences, and some people, they really struggle to talk about things. They don't really understand what they're feeling, or they're not really that connected to themselves as much as others. So when everyone comes to the service, we offer them a range of different supports, because everyone needs a different package. So the clay project in its most recent form is something that we offer as a 12-week programme, and it's normally for the people who are much more expressive in terms of their creativity, or they're not so much talkers. So what the aim was is to get people who don't necessarily go in a group and express everything that's going on for them. It's more really the people who sit quietly and don't really engage as well. So how we get people on is we give them a call and we talk that through. They get recommended from their other allocated workers, because we have a lot going on in the service. And it's been an absolutely lovely complement to what we offer. And the people who have been on it have been able to open up because of the work that Jo's done and the elements that the recovery workers have been putting in terms of helping them to make the connections with the clay and with their own recovery journey and their emotions. So it has been offered at the beginning. We ask that we get a full commitment, because the 12-week programme is about a journey for them, and they do learn quite a lot, which we'll come to a little bit through the presentation, but that's how we get people onto the project. So over to you, Jo.
Thank you. So once clients join the project, we have quite a, not a formal scheme of work, that sounds far too like school, but it is a kind of a program that we've developed, and we've tried this a few times now, and we're actually doing a bit of an experiment at the moment with another artist delivering it to see how it works that way. And so we tend to split the 12-week course into 2 blocks. And the first is a really hands-on, practical exploration of material, and it results in a very practical object. So we make a box, something to contain something. And having worked with the clients over the years, I've really recognised how valuable it is that people do really enjoy having something to show for their time. And so that's where we start off. So they're kind of building their confidence through the different skills and resulting in that object. And then in the second block, we take a much more expressive and sculptural approach to working with clay, and people will begin to kind of use clay to tell stories about themselves or parts of their life, or reflect on things. So it's structured in a way that we kind of gently ease into that, and that's really helped by all the work that's done in the sessions that's led by Vicky, which is around reflecting on the connections that people can make with their recovery process. So perhaps Vicky could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in the first session, Jo will tend to talk about the origins of clay. And as part of that, she'll go through the history, the successes, the developments over the years of where clay's come from, because I think it's really important for them to kind of understand the material that they're working with. So as Jo spoke about that, then I would come in and start talking about how the client needs to connect with their own journey Where do they come from? What was their upbringing? And what was their childhood like? What were the parents like? Kind of looking at their own culture in their own family, because we all grow and develop and learn in all different ways, and our experiences kind of shape us. Very much so with the clay, that as you're moulding it, you're shaping it. We kind of help them to connect them parallels that sometimes life and the events that get thrown at us, or the way that we've been brought up, can often lead us into addiction, into making decisions around coping strategies that result in addiction and substance misuse. So it's really good for them to connect with who they are and how they've come to be where they are today. And then we'll talk about how to look after clay. So Jo will talk about how to take care of it, how much dust there is when you're working with clay, how to wrap it when you're finished with it so it doesn't dry up. So Jo will talk about all them practicalities that is all about taking care of this product that you're making. And then that's where I would come in and help them to connect that actually how do they take care of them emotionally? What do they do each day that helps them to be wrapped up and taken care of? And that might be about saying, what's your daily routine? Are you having a bath every day? Are you connecting with people? So as Jo's talking about the clay part, it helps to have really good discussions about how to look after themselves. And throughout the whole of the session, the first 5 sessions where we're particularly making the box, it's really good for them to, there's so many parallels all the way through it, like just putting colour. What colour are you going to add into how are you going to decorate your box once it's made? What are you adding on to it? How do you add on to it? And as Jo's doing all the technical sides, I'm then saying, let's talk about what adds colour into your life. What do them colours represent? So the colours could be my children getting a job, having a hobby. It's all, at the moment, there's kind of this blank life right now, and I can shape it however I want. What can I add into my recovery lifestyle? I've left addiction behind, but what can I add on? And having the clay as an external tool helps people who don't particularly talk to connect to themselves in a much deeper way that they wouldn't have been able to do through a normal group. The second block of 6 is really about connecting with we ask them to choose to make something that represents either their addiction or their recovery. And it is all about just feeling your way through and getting comfortable with the clay. And we've had some absolutely incredible things made. So there's been someone who's made a hand, and in the hand there's a hole and there's a little person in the hole. And then they've put a chain that wraps around the fingers with all the things inscribed in that they lost to addiction. And they called it the addict in the hole. And for them, being able to have something that really represented what addiction took away from them in a really tangible way, really hit home for them, and they can put that in their home and be proud of what they've made, but also have a constant reminder that actually they're out of their addiction life now. And the pride that they've taken and the excitement of when's Jo dropping my stuff back off has been absolutely wonderful, because when people are in recovery, they tend to not really see their growth. It can take months and months to see that they've achieved something, where with the clay, they can set a goal, make something, design something, make something, then have something really tangible to take away. And a lot of them are so thoughtful, they make gifts for their loved ones, and that means it's a really deep and meaningful experience for them. Is there anything you would add about that, Jo?
No, I think just how you've spoken there is really how it works in the session. Vicky is so brilliant at picking all these little things that you don't really think twice about when you're working with clay, and she really finds those connections and makes that really meaningful for people. And so that's what's really wonderful about working together, is that the fact that we're both in the room and both of us have a specialisms, and neither of us feel that we have to be a specialism in the other thing. So Vicky doesn't have to get her hands dirty if she doesn't want to, and I don't have to feel as though I'm an art therapist, because I'm not an art therapist. So I think that really reflects how we work. And what's lovely is about working over that period of time is that you can slowly build up those conversations. So I always like to open with like some kind of conversation starter, but it will often be a very sort of soft subject. Like I'll take in lots of different colourful things, and we'll just talk about what our favourite colour is or something, and then we can build on the kind of having those deeper conversations later on. And so I was just going to talk a little bit now about how we work together. So that kind of gives you a bit of insight into how we work together in the sessions. And then outside of the sessions, we're currently funded by a funding body called the RAIN Foundation, and that's given us enough funding to kind of have meetings together and planning time. And even before we had that funding, we had things in place such as Vicky gave me some safeguarding training and that kind of thing, so I was prepared for working in that particular environment, so I could protect myself and protect the clients that we're working with. And we really keep that up by having regular check-ins. So after every session each week, we would have a phone call and just check in on how everything was going. And also, working together on funding. So that funding from the RAIN Foundation came out of the work that Vicky and our former colleague Kat Evans did together to apply for the funding for the project. So that's a really important way of making things happen. Sometimes when you work in a partnership with an arts organisation, it might feel like the arts organisation is kind of pushing the other side to do it all. I don't know, but it's a really equal partnership in this case. It's so it's really great. So the next thing we thought it was worth touching on is about how we've operated during the last couple of years during COVID. So do you want to tell them a little bit about that, Vicky?
Yeah, so I always think when we put these groups together, it often is the people who are in the group on how it works out. And because of COVID, we had to do some things online, which was full of challenges, in the sense that we really had to observe from afar, where when you're in the room, you can just notice that someone needs a little bit of extra help, and you can just jump in and do that straight away. So for me and Jo, we really had to be really watching everybody across one screen, and sometimes we'd just see the top of the head of people, and sometimes we wouldn't be able to see what they were making, and we'd say, could you just lift it up to the camera? And we had to make it, and sometimes they couldn't get the internet to work, or on our most recent online one, someone didn't wrap the clay right, so midway I'm darting out to drop more clay off into their home. So the online stuff comes with so many challenges, but on both times we had some really wonderful work made, and I think both me and Jo were surprised ourselves, because making the box can be quite tricky when you've never touched a clay before in your life. But we successfully got all the boxes made, didn't we, Jo? So yeah, it was quite good.
Yeah, I think I found it really valuable, because I really couldn't step in and help or do anything. So sometimes if it's in person, I'll be quite tempted to kind of pre-roll some slabs or get everything at the right dryness so that we can just get on with the fun bit. But when we were doing the remote workshops, everything had to be done by the client, which I think actually was really empowering for them, because once they had their object that they'd made, they knew they'd done absolutely the whole thing from scratch. So that's something that we've definitely been thinking more about when we've taken the project back into being in person.
Yeah, I think what we lost a little bit of by doing it online is that real emotional connection of a group, that when you're sat in a room, there's this energy that is just there, the peaceful environment, the support of watching each other work and the conversations that happen in between that. And we had some really wonderful face-to-face groups where the people who were in there, they were actually people who never spoke about what was going on in their lives, and they ended up saying that they'd learned so much about themselves during being there, and they'd made friends and they've stayed friends, and as they were leaving they were going for coffees with each other afterwards. So I think that's what you get additional from being face to face, and compared to being on the Zoom, you could tell that connection wasn't quite as much there, but still equally the pride was there, and the absolute self-fulfillment of being able to achieve and do all of it on their own. But I think me and Joe were like, please let this work because we can't save it kind of feeling, wasn't it, Joe?
Yeah, it was quite nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
So for the most recent course, so as well as this kind of 12-week program that clients do, what we try and do 2 or 3 times a year is host a residency for people that have done the program, and then they can come to our studio in Spode. Here we go. So here's some pictures from this wonderful 4 days we had in June. So it was just when things were starting to open up again. So for a lot of the clients, it was the first thing that they'd done with other people for ages. So we were all a bit exhausted at the end of each day because we'd actually spoken to real people. But they came down to Spode, which for some of the clients, they've grown up in Stoke-on-Trent and they know the area really well, and they know the history connected with Spode. And for others, it's of no relevance at all, but they get really excited about being in a studio space and somewhere different, and although rather makeshift, being in a sort of purposeful space. So they came along for 4 days, 2 days 1 week, 2 days the following week. And for a long time now, we've talked about doing some raku firing with the group. And we thought, right, it's now or never. So we decided to go for it this time. And so we set a theme at the start of the residency, which was not knowing, and kind of experimenting and doing this really experimental process that you don't know if something's going to come out of it in the end. So there was 2 days of making. They worked on the wheel and hand building with formers. And I was assisted by another artist named Kath Ralph, and also later in the week was by Sarah Fraser. And then we fired them over that weekend, and then they came back the following week, glazed the pieces, and then we raku fired them. And there's Sarah and Kath doing the firing. They look like they're in a rock band. And it was a really wonderful 4 days. People got a lot out of being in each other's company, and also making quite quickly and spontaneously. And the pieces themselves are now on display at the British Ceramics Biennial Festival. So there are the works that they've made, which you can see them cleaning up here. They're on display. And also for 2 of the days, we were joined by a poet, Anja Malik. She's a wonderful writer and really great at getting people to write and talk about their experiences. And she pulled together a poem from each of the participants, which really reflects back to them some of their own words about their own experiences, and they're on display as well as part of a larger project called Stoke Makes Plates at the festival. And it's been really wonderful to see so many of the clients come in and see their work and want to show other people. And one client was on Midlands Today talking about the project, and it's just really, really good to see how proud they are of the pieces that they've created. So that was a real high of this year. And it's something that we've tried to do throughout the project, is to have these opportunities for exhibition. And often beforehand, I'm always a bit nervous. I feel like I'm kind of putting people under pressure and making them put things on display. And then it all comes together really well in the end. And they actually, we've always had a very positive reaction to it. So I think that's about it, everything that we were going to talk about. It was just if anyone had any specific questions for Vicky, because she's got to shoot off, you could ask them now. Otherwise, I'll stay till the end and you can ask me if you have any questions.
Yeah, no questions just yet, but maybe some questions at the end. Yeah, just some lovely comments just coming through there from Tracy and from Joe. Oh, thank you both so much for sharing about how you work together and how you work in a really amazingly collaborative way through this process. It's wonderful to hear the equal partnership and how the workshops and the sessions take shape. And it's amazing to see the plates on exhibition at BCB. They're absolutely gorgeous, so beautifully made, and the poems are stunning and well worth experiencing and spending time with if anybody has the chance. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Vicky, so much for this evening.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So I will move on to the next 2 speakers we have this evening. And well, finally, last but by no means least, we have Dena, Bagi and Eva Masterman speaking with us this evening. We will be presenting a film which they have created together. But just to introduce them, Dena Bagi is a lecturer and a practice-based researcher in the arts sector. Her research practice involves working closely with community members and artists to curate clay workshops, projects and learning/play spaces. She believes passionately that working with clay has a profound effect on healing and health in general. Dena has been instrumental in a lot of the engagement and health work BCB have delivered, as Joe had mentioned earlier, and it's a joy to see her passion for clay and health grow and progress in such incredible ways. Dena is today in conversation with Eva Masterman, an artist, lecturer, podcaster and cat mum. She co-runs the art collective Collective Matter, which facilitates material-based opportunities for artists and younger people. Her practice investigates the cross-disciplinary application of clay pedagogies as an identity building tool, and wholeheartedly believes as clay as a force for good. BCB, we have had the great pleasure of working with Eva whenever she was an award exhibitor in BCB 2017. And more recently, I have to mention to check out her podcast, Clay Commons. Your ears and your mind are in for an absolute treat. Definitely look it up after today's session. I will hand over to Eva and I will share the introductory slide with you all. Oh, bear with me.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Rhiannon, that's amazing. Literally just as you said that, my cat just walked into the room.
Ready for their close-up, right?
You're only meowing, that's what it is. Yeah, thanks so much for having us both. And yeah, to everyone else who's just spoken, it's just been like really amazing practices and sort of different ways of looking at sort of ceramics and kind of value and things. Dena is going to be joining us in a little bit. She's just got to put her kids to bed. But yeah, just to kind of introduce what we did, we've kind of taken a slightly different sort of avenue for this. So we decided to, as soon as the COVID regulations lifted, we were like, we need to meet each other in person again. So we did that, and we've taken the opportunity to film ourselves collaboratively making, it's kind of a pot, some kind of vessel-y type situation, whilst discussing the importance of making and particular kind of elements of clay in the studio that can, or the particular elements that clay in the studio kind of bring to a sort of connected human experience. Within that, we've discussed the power of being able to see yourself in clay, which I think other people, I think Joe and Vicky just really kind of captured some of that as well. Its responsiveness and how we respond in turn to that material. And personally, I really think that clay, more than any other material, really kind of speaks back to you, and it kind of holds space and time and creates a commonality of purpose, and it really kind of creates a space for conversation and communication. And also it really just demands you to be really present with it. So that means that you end up being really present with the people who are in the room with you as well. So it's something quite special, really. We also touch on some ideas around the value of objects and how clay might hold feeling and emotion and help us tap into the things that, yeah, make us human. And the idea with this whole sort of this whole film that you're about to see is that our conversation would be informed and led by this co-making of a vessel, so that we're kind of trying to embody or kind of practice the concepts that we're talking about as we're talking. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it, and yeah, we'll both be here, I think, at the end to answer any questions.
Lovely, thank you, Eva. I will share the other screen and hit play. Just want to mention before I hit play, if you're having trouble seeing the film, sometimes it's due to Wi-Fi issues, turn your camera off, that sometimes helps. And if anybody does end up having problems with the film and not being able to see it fully, I'll be sure to share it with you afterwards. So we do have the backup. So without further ado, I'll hit play.
Rhiannon, I think you should have, you need to select the share sound at the beginning. I think people are saying they can't hear it.
Yeah, I've just picked up on those messages.
There should be when you go to share screen, there should be something that also says share audio or something along those lines.
Okay, let me try that. Thank you, Eva. I'm sorry, everybody, but thank you for your patience.
Yeah, so if you go to the share screen, right in the bottom corner, there's something that says share sound. Yeah.
Optimize for video clip. Do I press that one too?
I'd ignore that one. I'd just do share sound.
Just do the one that we know. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Myself like flipping over.
Yeah, so you kind of, so that it's like ram's head is the one that I do. It's the most easy.
So you have like a little bit of clay on this board to make this.
That's a good idea. So it kind of goes into like a ram's head thing.
Oh.
And then the idea is that you get hold of its like ears or its horns and kind of push it in. So you're kind of pushing it from the outside into itself.
Okay. So we've got a ball here.
Yes.
So how do we get this ball into coils
Well,
and cut it back up, right?
actually, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't actually normally make that. It was just quite nice to make a ball from clay.
Isn't it?
And we managed to get two almost exactly the same size as well. It's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah.
I always really like, because I always wear this ring, it was my grandma's, and I always really like the kind of marks that it makes on it.
It does make a good mark. I'm
It's
jealous.
like
Oh!
you got the same. Yeah, so coiling. See, this is what, we were kind of talking about kind of critically kind of paying attention to the material, like the making or something. Like for me, it's the sort of accidental sections and actually paying attention to like the qualities of the material as you're working.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love this kind of teared mark on it.
Yeah, that reminds me of like a cliff or something.
Yeah.
But so why don't we take that though, and why don't we work with that
Mhm.
in terms of almost like a sketch,
Oh, nice.
so we can like
Yeah.
we can put that there, can't we? And then
Mhm.
maybe we can kind of work with that as like a director for the form or
Mhm.
the texture or something. Yeah, but I love that.
Yeah.
It's the earth, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like that thing of like, fire is trapped sunlight. It's sort of just interesting to kind of like see it.
Am I doing that? I know, you could go round.
I just go all the way around all the time. Just keep going up, keep going up.
Oh wow, I'll have to start again. And so you don't put any slip on?
No. Which again, this is probably showing everybody all of my terrible making techniques, but no, I don't bother. Unless it's like dried out, but if it's come straight out of the bag, I just always think it's absolutely fine.
Okay. And I'm just going to do what you do.
And then it's just sort of blended afterwards.
So in kind of education, we talk about these kind of play-based techniques that we kind of follow sometimes, and I can feel myself copying you. I'm kind of supposed to be copying you, aren't I? Because I don't know what I'm doing and you do. But it's such a unconscious thing, isn't it? To just look over and copy and mirror within this kind of physical, this space.
But also it's like, isn't it like the kind of basis of human communication to do that?
You think like the kind of the naturalness, is that even a word? The naturalness of the material kind of inspires this kind of really instinctive, natural, communicative style within this. Let's just talk about the space that we're in, I suppose.
Yeah, I think maybe as well because the material's so responsive as well. It's very easy, like to kind of copy or respond in quite a kind of an instant way.
Do you think? I don't know whether working with clay for me is that responsive. I don't know whether I get to it and I kind of have this feeling that I know what to do with it. And I think in a kind of workshop scenario, there's a lot of cats and snails being made. And that's
that along
Really?
with the like standard vagina and penises.
Oh, I don't get that. I don't know why. Well, it's mainly because I work with children in a workshop, so I think it would be some safeguarding stuff to report there. But I think that, it's a tricky beast, isn't it? I think and there's a lot of kind of reactions and responses to it. But I kind of like the confidence that you must have in it because you've not had loads of failures with it, so you must be quite confident with it, you know.
Well, I suppose
So I don't have one that has a rough edge. What have you done with the edge?
the serrated edges, yeah. I think I've got two in here. Yes, I did.
Thank you.
I suppose as well, like to a certain extent, you know, it's sort of staying within a certain level of comfort because, you know, I've just always coil built and kind of slab built, and I use a lot of moulds.
But that stuff's not easy.
Yeah,
I mean,
I suppose so. But then it's funny that, like, I think people, it's just like the kind of perception of what people think of as easy or not easy. Like I sometimes, because I've just spent my whole life making in some capacity or other, like, you know, we were kind of just such a makey kind of family. Like, you know, I'd be making, just sort of baking cakes and stuff with mum, or
okay, yeah.
and like kind of knitting and things. So I've always had a kind of dexterity with my hands. And there was something interesting. I had this conversation about kind of event horizons, which you kind of, a lot of people talk about it in terms of development with language.
Okay.
That there's like a kind of point at which people become incapable of finding language and holding on to language if they haven't had an experience of it by a certain point of their development.
Yeah.
And the same thing kind of goes for making. So whilst you can obviously learn to make something, if you haven't had those very early experiences, then it's very possible that you may not ever reach that kind of master level. Like in a kind of similar way to kind of, you know, a concert musician, for instance. You know, someone who starts at 16 is never going to be as good as someone who starts at 4.
Okay.
Because there's an inherent kind of,
Like there's a psychological, like there's like a pathway thing happening.
yeah, there's like certain pathways and sort of links that are created early on in your brain's sort of development, that if you miss those early connections, then you never really get them back. It sort of shuts them down. Your kind of capacity to learn them.
So that's why you think you just kind of go at it, I suppose.
Yeah, like I've just never had a problem kind of making things or sort of doing things. I think as well, like you say, it's sort of maybe to do with confidence, like that kind of, you know, I kind of grew up, again, it's that thing of mirroring, isn't it? You know, I kind of grew up with a dad who just made stuff and just, you know, something broke in the house, he'd just go and fix it without really kind of commenting on it.
Yeah, so your kind of home environment was one where people were tinkering with stuff all the time and making stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And you know,
yeah, so that's like the making environment here. I'm much more confident with you here than if I was on my own.
Yeah.
If I was on my own in this room with a bag of clay, I don't know whether, well, I'd make something. I'm having trouble getting inside because I made mine too small.
So you could use a different type of tool.
Ta-da. Right. I guess I can use the back, which is shaped like
use
a
the
finger.
serrated bit on
You
that
go
end.
jump ahead to the serrated. You wouldn't do the first step.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, no, or I'd use like the corner of it to kind of dig it in.
Okay.
Because that end will just end up smoothing it,
Okay.
and you don't really want that. You want to kind of like meld them together.
I was looking for the thing most shaped
Most
like
finger-like.
the, but then like the step I was missing.
Because I use it like a kind of pinch motion, like that. So it's sort of pulling material down and then bringing it back up again.
See, that's quite earthly as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm finding myself like wanting to kind of like frame these as little like
Yeah.
snapshots of interesting points.
Sort of building this up so it gets a bit bigger.
Why is yours so much bigger than mine? Look at that.
Yep. But it's going to work out. I've got the plan.
Right. As long as you know what's going on.
But this is the thing. This is what I do. Like big, kind of quick profiles. I think you've made a more difficult shape. Is the main thing, because you've gone out and in a sort of elliptical way.
I'm kind of trying to like plan ahead.
Yeah.
And think about this form a little bit. So maybe I should go off a little bit more.
Sure. Do you want me to tell you what I'm thinking about it? Like how it's going to attach? Because I'm feeling like this is going to be like a spout.
Ooh, okay.
Like.
Ah, okay. I thought we were going to have to put it on top.
No, my thought was that sort of thing.
Yeah, why not? Are we going to cut it in there?
Yeah, can do. So yeah, maybe yours needs to kind of come. What do you think?
Or maybe it needs to come out the side so it can kind of join up. We were talking about a method of therapy. Something about the gazing eye, basically, is that you must kind of, the mutual gaze.
Yeah.
That you kind of have to break that gaze sometimes to tackle quite stuff that's important, so therefore can be quite kind of harmful.
Yeah.
And just kind of reflecting on what we've ended up talking about, I suppose.
Yeah.
Is like how great clay is, but in quite an earthly way. And I suppose what we're doing is testing out the social benefits of this space. And I doubt that we would be talking and kind of coming to such conclusions if we were just sat in front of each other in a coffee shop.
Yeah.
But I wonder what it is about it. Wonder what it is about this. Like, so we don't have that mutual gaze between each other. We have like a collective purpose.
Yeah.
Don't we? We're like both doing the same kind of. We've got the same end goal.
Yeah.
We have a therapeutic material between our fingers, and also I think it's interesting how you can push and pull within a conversation more easily while doing this. So we've explored quite a few kind of like not really that simple topics, have we, just now? Like talked about.
Well, I think maybe like it's sort of gotten even more kind of like poignant because we've just come out of COVID or something as well. Like I remember when I first saw someone and was able to actually sit across from them after however many months of like basically having all of my conversations done whilst walking with someone like next to me. And
in a new space, in a new location, right? So some of those relationships must be quite new.
Yeah, exactly. But I found it incredibly confronting actually having to like look someone in the face again.
Yeah.
I found it really difficult.
Yeah.
And I think
you're not alone. I definitely did as well.
Yeah, and I think. See, I'm now actually thinking coming more over to your side of things because I think I've basically brought it together now. So if or maybe
there's points kind of on that side. I just kind of said that we're making that.
Yeah.
Though.
So I think maybe I need to I think that's the sort of the nice sort of arc of it, isn't it? But the thing with clay is that you can see where you've gone and where you're going. So if you're working, and you can see very kind of clearly that if someone is touching something, the mark is left.
Yeah.
And you can see your own mark. So it becomes this very kind of like physical representation of you and your body and your presence.
And that's an archaeological kind of, like a timeline of where you've been and where you're.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it allows for a kind of shared experience between kind of carers and dementia patients because they can work adjacent to each other and still have that kind of shared.
And have this timeline, and it's kind of really clear where you've been and where.
Exactly.
And perhaps where you're going.
Yeah. Yeah, for like a kind of brief moment you're both working in the same time.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And sort of similarly with mental health issues. I mean, there's all sorts of things around kind of repetitive physical action actually helping with disassociation, because again, like one of the big things with like extreme trauma is that you end up becoming disassociated from your body and from the world and all this kind of stuff. So having a repetitive action that kind of forces you to be very present with that kind of physicality, like it helps. and sort of brings people back, brings people back and kind of reconnects them to themselves and to the world.
And that can be traumatic, I imagine.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Like,
well, yeah.
I wonder if we'd be more open with each other today than we would have been as well. Like, talked about stuff that perhaps we wouldn't have. Like, we haven't really talked about our personal lives, have we? I suppose maybe because that's we don't want to be narcissistic and there's a film running.
Yeah.
Like, but I wonder if there wasn't a film running and kind of we didn't have a goal to talk about a certain amount of things, whether we would have just talked about what we would have talked about.
Yeah.
Whether we would have really talked deeply about ourselves and had this experience where we did a lot of sharing.
Well, I think this is it, like the sort of other thing in kind of terms of the like mental health stuff, or like, I don't know, even just sort of having a chat with someone, like it kind of takes the pressure off. You know, there's something incredibly affronting about kind of sitting like opposite someone and having to, that's why interviews are so terrifying. You know, having to kind of sit opposite someone with nothing in between you. I think we're kind of there, no?
Yeah.
Just leave that this edge.
Yeah, and it gives you the space, doesn't it? We've talked about this a bit, like it gives you the breathing space to really take in what someone's saying.
Yeah.
Breathe, look at something else, and maybe that's not that's not a conscious thing, but there's definitely stuff that you said today that's been totally new to me. And if we were sat in front of each other, or like the Zoom meetings we've had or whatever, I'd probably feel like I had to say something straight away to it. This has dried out a bit actually.
Yeah, good. I quite like that little frill around it.
What? That way? Or that way?
Interesting.
It's quite that looks like more of a traditional pot, whereas that, but like that kind of looks like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think this way.
Yeah?
Yeah. There's this scrapey thing, yeah, we need some slip, don't we, to kind of slurry to put them together.
Okay. Well, that means I'm gonna make the thing that you taught me how to make. So just like that, yeah, and then pour some water in there. Why don't I know how to do this? The amount of workshops I've done where I've like forgotten to dry the clay out and make slip the day before.
I don't know who taught me that. You know, it's the thing that I like really love about kind of working sort of next to each other, which again I think is a very kind of crafty sort of mentality that you kind of work with people. But I guess as well that I've been a sort of a technician and I did theatre props for ages and stuff like that as well. So you kind of, I've seen a lot of different ways of making things for like different.
Can I pinch that bit in?
Yeah.
What do you reckon? How did you score it? Just.
With the serrated edge.
Well, I can do it better, can't I?
Yeah.
I think we should break it now. Because I think we're trying to make it perfect.
I'd forgotten that we were going to
I know.
make it.
How do you feel about that?
I feel good about it. I think we should.
How do you think about us just like poking
I
it?
was going to say, because I'm quite into the idea of maybe like a kind of strawberry pot or something.
Because then you can prepare it, can't you?
Yeah.
We can repair it if we poke it. Why don't we both poke it?
But also I feel like it'll be nice to kind of deform it and kind of rip it apart slightly, and then the rips can become part of it.
Oh, it's so pretty though, isn't it?
It's turned into quite a nice form actually.
Yeah.
Because then we get some of this lovely tearing as well.
Did you see the shape now? You gonna do it again?
Yeah, I think. Do you want another one?
This is making me feel very uncomfortable.
Is it?
Yeah?
Well, it's kind of feels very kind of Fontana-esque to me.
It's Fontana.
Is that Fontana? Fontana? You know the talking about abstract expression.
Right, okay, yeah.
The guy who cut canvases.
Oh right, okay. I
Lucio
can
Fontana.
visualise it.
Fontana. Yeah.
Can we repair this now?
Do you want to?
Yeah.
Do you think? See, my instinct is to just like keep going until it's just until we can kind of reuse the clay.
What do you think? Keep.
See, I think it shouldn't become an object, a permanent object. I think it should just get pushed down and like we should wedge it back together again.
Why? Because we've been looking at that as like an earthly form.
And because I think a lot of what we've been talking about is to do with kind of reciprocity and conversation, community, and kind of cycles maybe a little bit.
Okay.
Like kind of thinking, even in the sort of nature thing, we're talking about like how it kind of energy gets kind of reused, right? And then talking about kind of clay as a generative, sort of transformative material, you know.
I feel quite protective over the form. But we have broken it, haven't we?
Yeah.
And we have repaired it.
Yeah. And it's sort of turned into something else now.
Yeah.
Which I think actually is probably more interesting.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's been like a negotiation between us, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So like you wanted to completely wreck it.
I mean, I still kind of want to completely wreck it, but you want to finish it, you want to leave it like this.
Yeah, no, we're going to have to wreck it, aren't we? I think that kind of matches what we've been saying, and I'm not going to let the perfectionism in me control that. Can we do it quickly before I change my mind?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to put 2 hands on it?
Yeah, ready, steady. Woo! Okay. And should we wedge it again?
Yeah. And then we come full circle, right?
Full circle, yeah.
It feels to me like the thing that kind of puts clay apart a lot of the time is the environment that you make it, that you make in it, that you make with it, or make it in. And especially like with these kind of sort of like actual kind of open studio type things, you know, where they've got kind of the practice is so tied to a space that it kind of fosters this sense of community without even trying. Like, you know, you can't...
So do you think that's connected back to what we were talking about before about like the communities across the world that were built on making objects slowly with each other? Do you think like the new trend of community studios, it's not that new, is it? But it's fairly new. Kind of encompasses that. Everyone gets together. They've got a common goal. It's a new community, and then all of this other stuff comes out where they have all of these more responsive and mutual and reciprocal conversations, and therefore they feel very, very, very connected to that community, and they feel at home there, and they feel like they've got a common purpose, and they're happy. Like maybe the mix of clay and space is like the perfect storm, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. Like, it does sort of feel like, because I think clay is so often, I mean, we were just having a conversation about, isn't it amazing that you can just pitch up in an office and start making with clay, but so it has that kind of flexibility to be able to like go to different spaces, but equally when it's done, you know, that the sort of traditional way it's sort of set up, eventually you're going to need a kiln. So it requires space, and it requires like a permanency, like a permanent space.
Yeah.
Which I think maybe, especially if you're talking about people who are kind of maybe on the sort of margins for whatever reason, you know, through sort of mental health or ability or kind of race or gender, etc. having that kind of stable, solid ground to come back to, that you can then sort of take ownership of and kind of settle into, and have like-minded people, or maybe not even like-minded people, but have a.
No, I think that's the interesting thing, that you can maybe the use of the word ground then, which I think is really key, isn't it? We've talked about that cycle loads. If you have the material as a ground, then maybe that is always going to make you feel more grounded. And then you have all the other stuff that we've talked about on top of that. You have, you know, all these new skills, and you have a common goal, and you have, you really feel at home there. Because also that is what we've been talking about. That's the formula, that's the sum for a happy community, isn't it? You make something slowly together. You work with something from the ground, and you put it back into the ground. You're respectful. You give each other space. You work in tune with nature. And no wonder people's mental health improves. And there's hundreds of clay studios all over the country.
It even felt nice watching you work with clay.
There's something quite meditative about it, isn't it? Watching someone else make something.
Yeah, it was really lovely. Thank you both so much for preparing that. It was just such an interesting way to also share your conversation around clay, and how it can be so important in working with people, and the space that it can give people in communication and working through things.
Yeah, I mean, I think both like Joe, Vicky and Phoebe are also all talking about exactly the same thing, probably a lot more eloquently than I ever did. But it's sort of all about, that sort of need to have space and time to either heal or sort of find themselves again, or even just be in community with people. It's really, really important. I think there's something very specific that clay does, like, quite inherently within that, because it does require space, and you do have to kind of come together to do it.
Yeah, like going back to your thing about like being calm, I found that really calming to watch as well. And I think for me, unlike probably, or maybe like Vicky, but everyone else gets to kind of use clay every day, and that's their practice, but it isn't mine. And I think there's only so much like reading you can do about clay to kind of understand how brilliant it is. So it was really great to get into a space and make, and kind of with lots of time and space, and just really kind of delve deep into why it was this great kind of communal material. Like, I don't know whether that's the right term, but yeah, it was really great. We both really enjoyed it, didn't we?
Yeah, it was really good.
Is there anything that comes to your mind, having watched it back again? Is there anything that comes to your mind as like something that you feel that's resonated with you, seeing it back or hearing it back?
I think for me, the most kind of surprising thing that came out of the day was talking about space and talking about kind of building something together. And like you mentioned, Rhiannon, like the work I did with you guys at the biennial, and that kind of the instigation of like more play-based stuff. And like, I'm a massive believer in its transformational qualities and what that does. And so I kind of read a lot about that, and I do a lot of projects about that. But the kind of building up of a space from the ground that then you own because you value it was really profound for me, I think, and kind of opened up a lot of thinking around that part of things, rather than just thinking about this material that makes you feel like a human because it goes round in circles, like you come from the ground and you end up back in the ground just like clay. So that was, for me, that was that. What about you, Eva?
Yeah, I think kind of the same. I mean, I always think like clays are sort of, it's such a kind of fluid material, like it can inhabit so many different aspects of everything. And I think we've kind of, as a discipline, maybe kind of like shoehorned it into quite a kind of narrow idea of what it should be, without really paying a huge amount of attention, again, as a discipline, as to what else it can do. And I think, you know, you can make it at the kitchen table, or you can, you know, create, you know, you need a kiln ultimately at some point, but it has this really like amazing kind of leveling quality where you can just make a mark in it, and that still can be just as transformational as if you've, you know, spent hours throwing and sort of learning that skill. I think it's, yeah, I don't know, I think the space thing as well, as like Dena was saying, it's just really like how we create space, I guess. I think it's like, and how we create space for each other. There's something about having like this kind of physical material in front of you that kind of creates something, like creates some kind of relational connection or something.
We talked about it building backup cities, didn't we? Like building backup spaces after kind of other stuff that used to happen in like out, because we filmed that at the National Glass Centre because I'm doing my PhD at Sunderland, and Eva's just relocated up that way as well to do her PhD at Newcastle University. And I think that we were kind of in a industrial city. I'm from Stoke, and we talked about this kind of common space that loads of people used to have, where they used to go into a room together and make with some kind of natural material, or sometimes, yeah, and that was kind of a space where people communicate and they would connect, and they were kind of, there wasn't really a hierarchy. There was people just kind of made relationships and made relationships for life, and then that's been taken away. So you know, and clay can form a bridge back to that, or an antidote to that, and provide kind of you know, those conversations and that kind of material engagement that can kind of heal communities again, I think.
And I thought I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts on that are, Phoebe, like sort of talking about working with communities in Peckham to kind of create space which is for communities which have, I mean, they've not been pushed out, but, you know, it's definitely the gentrification of that is quite a kind of a violence that sort of happened on that community, and like being able to kind of create space and access to a kind of clay again. Like, I think that's something really important.
Yeah, well, I think I noticed when I went to do the first sessions, I had to do a sort of shadowing evening just to check that I knew how to use the studio we were going to be working in. And so I shadowed and before that I'd been feeling a bit of ambivalence. There'd been so much time between like the sort of initial idea and then actually us being able to do it. And I think there can be a lot of ambivalence with projects that are identity based. You can kind of think like, you know, for me, whenever you do something that is organising based around identity, it's a very strategic thing. It's not it's not my ethics of how I think we should live. It's like a strategic bit of activism and organising so that people either have the power to then exist collectively, or the resources or the energy or just the respite, whatever those intentional spaces might give. But it also means that like sometimes it can be like, oh wait, why are we doing this again? And when I did the shadowing class, I was in an evening class of 12 people in Hackney, because that's where the location was, and everyone there was white, and everyone was having a lovely time. It was really calming, all different levels of experience. And we're in London. Obviously, there are going to be different, what it means to have a more diverse group is going to mean different things in different parts of the country, depending on, it might be different kind of things. Maybe it's based around ability, class and other things, as well as race. But yeah, I was just like, yeah, this is not fair. It's not fair. And everyone, it happened that I caught the introduction that the teacher was leading, which was asking everyone to say what their jobs were, or it didn't have to be what their jobs were, but that kind of is what ended up happening from the question the teacher introduced. And everyone was like, basically just said well-paid jobs where they were basically on furlough or just had a lot of available income. And I was just like, okay, well, it can't be that only these people who should also have access to these lovely things should have access to all that it brings. And probably there are other people who have a lot more economic and kind of structural stresses who could get even more from these kind of benefits of just, yeah, the relaxation through clay. So I really identify with what you're saying.
And like one of the things that I like kind of banged on about, I always think I'm really boring kind of talking about like the kind of money issue, but like, and sort of talking across not even like sectors. So if you're talking about, I think maybe Jo, you might have something to say about this as well, in terms of like how you can kind of link up like clay and care, you know, like kind of having conversations across those sort of disciplines or those sectors, where it's like kind of creating a sort of a collaborative experience where you're kind of using the insight and the sort of skill of an artist next to the kind of skill and you know knowledge of like a care worker to kind of create a really interesting and really kind of supportive, well-rounded experience for people. But then it's like, how on earth do you create a business model out of that? Like, I don't know how sustainable your Mudbelly Ceramics is, Phoebe, if you're kind of just going on like a funding model. Like, and I think that's the thing, you know, having spoken to kind of kiln rooms who are in Peckham, you know, they started up as a business, which inherently means that people have to pay to use it. So there's like a really kind of difficult question that I'm kind of juggling with at the moment. Like, how do you start those conversations when you kind of start saying, we as artists do actually have something to support, like to give to those other sectors, and we're worth being paid to do that.
Yeah, but to be honest, I don't think that most people, it should be part of the way you're thinking from the moment you start. And I think the problem, whether people at the kiln rooms are well-meaning or not, ultimately there would be space to have even one or two places for people who couldn't afford it, and they could make space. And
I think an interesting point might be about the role of us, like as artists and creatives. I mean, it's Jo's baby, but when I was back at the biennial and taught and trying to integrate ceramics into care, that we never kind of set out to be therapists. And I think, like, if your belief that might transfer into the belief system around like thinking that you should provide, and we absolutely should, but shouldn't we become activists and make other people do that too? It shouldn't just be up to you or the director of the kiln rooms, or it should be, you know, there should be a far more fair approach to who gets to access this stuff. And I don't know whether it should be independent people. You know, we all have a responsibility, but also kind of, you know, there's been loads of political moves that has stripped the creative curriculum out of the high school, you know, offer.
I mean, the people who run kiln rooms, yeah, but the people who run kiln rooms came out of that, like benefited from that, and so they know, and I know that they're like must be politically aware about the fact that those things have been stripped, because the person who runs it and some of the other people who have worked there as teachers benefited from having that kind of teaching in schools, and that's why they were able. Was some of their first experiences of it, right? Yeah. So I do think it's each of our responsibilities. And when they, you know, the thing is I know that they didn't think about it, right?
Yeah. I'm not saying it's not our responsibility.
No, but like
saying that what else can we do to
I mean, I already think that's a huge thing, to be honest. Like, if someone like the kiln rooms moves into Peckham levels, and which is like one of the biggest gentrifying moves they could make in the area. And there would also be potentially, and maybe that there is also a thing about like more knowledge about kind of like how to access money. I would really think that they would have had a very, very good chance of getting some funding or figuring out a different kind of model, being in that space, because there were lots of businesses who were given funding to like basically to keep their diversity quota, so they could do a massive like capitalist exercise in those Peckham levels. So like if they had actually thought about it at the beginning, okay, like who is actually going to come to these classes? Like how can it not just be like the same demographic that has always had access to these kind of like evening class structures outside of colleges? Yeah, and obviously they need to run a business.
I think
and
that
make
if
money.
you look at,
I understand that.
yeah, if you look at the biennial studio, which Joe who talked earlier, invented, literally kind of moved into a room with nothing but kiln and built it up from the ground, and she used to carry Sennett's Together book with her. God knows how many times she's read it. And that studio is absolutely what you're saying. It runs as a business, profitable. It runs classes that people with disposable income can come and use. It also runs classes which you can only book onto through the council if you're of lower income and you have access to benefits. It also runs all the community projects, and the health-based projects of the biennial run through it, so everyone comes through it. They get studio space, they get residencies. It's an organic thing that serves the whole of the community in Stoke-on-Trent. She's achieved it, other people can achieve it. I think my point before was just about,
just to add in, I don't think we make any money.
it wipes its own nose though, Joe, doesn't it?
Just about. I think we've struggled a little bit post-COVID, but when I set it up, I guess I was aware of kiln rooms and better to say someone else, and Turning Earth.
Turning Earth, and I should say I'm affiliated with more with Turning Earth, and they're definitely, I'm happy to throw them under the bus too, because they don't think about any of these things.
Stuart.
Yeah. And I knew that model just wouldn't work in Stoke. I mean, a variation on that model would work in Stoke, but that wasn't the kind of model that I was interested in. And I felt very lucky to work under the umbrella of the biennial, which has given me possibilities to work in a slightly different way, that we can prioritise working with people from all sorts of different backgrounds.
It's all of our jobs to do exactly what we're doing, isn't it? To like be advocates for that. And I
mean, I think there's a dual thing, obviously, isn't there? Because I mean, ultimately the issue, like we've just illustrated with places like Kiln Rooms and Turning Earth and a whole host of other ones which have been set up by meaningful white middle class people, is that they're set up as businesses, and it's only like kind of after they've got themselves going that the kind of the kind of moral responsibility sort of tends to kick in.
It's like a second, not like a second thought, but why does it come after?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it is a second thought, because people think about it in terms of like a business model first, because they want to be able to perpetuate their own practices. A lot of the sort of modern clay, for instance, with Mark Essen in Birmingham, was set up as pretty much like a vanity project. He wanted to be able to create his own work, and he set it up as a kind of community co-op thing. And it's kind of,
if degree courses were better at teaching like fundraising and teaching, I don't know, like I feel like it's a big perpetual thing, isn't it? Like you don't learn the skills to fundraise effectively. So you could set up a charity within a business. You can split them, can't you, and have both running side by side. You don't have to set up a business first that kind of makes money and then think about it after, do you?
No, but I think that's the thing, like so the issue with all of these sort of spaces, well meaning as they may be, is that you're ultimately at the mercy of whoever it is who's leading it. So that's, up to their own experience, their own kind of awareness or whatever. But then there's another kind of level of sort of like policy making and kind of education and things like that, which also has to change. And that's ultimately like, there's a sort of a dual thing kind of we've got to this point where you can't really look at one thing and expect that to fix it. Like everything has to be changed at once, doesn't it?
And there needs a big movement, doesn't there? A massive movement needs to happen. Like everyone absolutely carry on doing what we're doing, and making sure the people that really need it get access to whatever they need to, but also there needs to be a massive shift in how things are funded. There needs to be a massive shift in how we deliver creative education, how we prioritise creativity in all kind of areas of society, really, doesn't it?